kind of very perspective of my 33 years of being a prosecutor in this state, and fully appreciate and understand what Measure 11 did. When it opened up and when we were considering it back in November of 1994 for passage, I stood for election as a state representative for my very first time. I was still in the Lane County District Attorney's Office working as a felony property crime prosecutor, and I ran against Measure 11 because I knew from my experience at that time, which was about 8 years in doing prosecution work, what the significant power shift it would be to have mandatory minimum sentencing and taking the judge out. And since this 26 years that we've had it in place since April of 1995, it's shown and demonstrated what impact it has had, which has been very unintended. When you look at the measures, when you look at the testimony that came in today, and also I would direct you to the Oregon District Attorneys Association's own polling that they did in December of 2020, that clearly reflects that the people of this state do in fact want judges. 58% want judges to be the ones that make the decision as to sentencing, and that they should in fact have discretion, meaning that they should be looking at each case on a case-by-case basis with all the specific facts and elements, as you've heard from the district attorneys who are currently serving the state that support this measure, as well as the 2 retired judges. I think it's important to call out and just really put forward why I believe that the District Attorneys Association is not willing to go forward with this reasonable reform. It's pure power and control. That is what it comes down to, because they are in the catbird seat to be able to actually dictate what is going to happen. And we've seen from the testimony we've had, not only today, but previously, is how different district attorneys will actually use that power. Look back to the statements of Judge Darrell Larson as well as Judge Ed Jones, both of them practitioners in their previous years before they went on the bench. Judge Larson, a career prosecutor for 17 or 18 years, he saw it just as I had. And I think this says a lot that when you have individuals who have served in those capacities, understanding what shift this has occurred, the people of this state did not expect that and did not want that. Again, when you look at the poll that was done by Oregon District Attorneys Association, question number 9, would you support or oppose the legislative replacing all violent felony mandatory minimum prison sentences with discretionary sentences, which provide judges with suggested ranges of years for various crimes, but allow defendants and prosecutors to argue for shorter or longer sentences? And the response was 57.9%. 58% said we support that. They want this change. They do believe there needs to be more balance in the system, and we should not have one advocate actually dictating what the sentence is and putting pressure as to how they negotiate. That is why I am a supporter of this bill. This is why I have been opposed to it for 26 years, and that is why we have Senate Bill 401 before us today. With that, I want to just go ahead and give Bobak an opportunity to make a statement. He was scheduled to be one of our presenters, but because of time conflicts, he was not able to present. So Bobak, if you could give us a short statement, and then we'll take questions.
Of course. Thank you, Senator Prozanski. And good morning, everyone. My name is Bobak Zulfagari Azar. I'm a family care manager with Portland OIC's Community Healing Initiative, where I work with gang-impacted African-American youth on probation. And I also serve as a board member at Partnership for Safety and Justice. Let's start here. Measure 11 reform is an opportunity to rebuild trust, repair harm, and restore hope in the community. Allowing judges to make fair, reasonable decisions about sentencing, giving justice-involved individuals an opportunity to earn time off their sentence for positive behavior, it's not revolutionary or innovative. It is humane. It's normal across the United States. This gives us an opportunity to shift from a shame-based punishment to internally driven accountability. Supporting Measure 11 reform, specifically ending mandatory minimum sentencing, aligns with community values and is centered around racial justice. Black Oregonians have experienced generations of having their families torn apart by over incarceration, which has been fueled by Measure 11 mandatory minimum sentencing. Consider the following data in Oregon. Black people make up less than 2% of the total state population, yet they make up almost 10% of Oregon's total prison population. 60% of Black Oregonians have a conviction. 60%. 22% have a felony on their record. 4 in 10 people in Oregon's prisons are incarcerated for Measure 11 convictions, and even more are there for plea deals that started with Measure 11 charges. When faced with fear and hopelessness due to an extremely punitive length of sentences and without the opportunity for a judge to weigh various factors in their case, almost every justice-involved individual settles with a plea deal, or what I call fear bargaining, right? We got plea bargaining. I've come to see this as fear bargaining when I've sat side by side with people whose lives were being negotiated in sentence lengths, right? All the powers with the prosecutor, where a minimum of 6 years of a person's life is negotiated in a sentence decision. It's a dehumanizing process. Measure 11 reform will signal to the community that legislative effort is being made in the interest of community values and support. Humanizing the process will deliver better outcomes. Ask yourself, would you feel more safe with a neighbor who served a long-term sentence day for day, or someone who was able to earn time off their sentence for positive behavior? A sentence that was reduced with the discretion of a judge because they were able to weigh several factors in making an informed decision, like someone's age, support in the community, input from the victim, justice-involved history, and someone's mental health. Which pathway would lead to safer, thriving communities? This is an opportunity to focus on rebuilding lives and make better investments in people, not prisons. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're ready for questions, Amanda. So I'm not sure. I guess maybe I'm supposed to be calling. I see a hand of Noel Crumby and then Wright.
Yeah. Wright had his hand up first, so we'll go to him first.
Okay.
And then we'll go to Noel and then Dirk.
Thank you. My question is for anyone who wants to answer. I moved here from a state where judges had much more discretion. It led to wildly different sentences depending on the county, depending on the judge, and many people complained that it also led to disproportionate sentencing for people of color. How do you respond to people who are concerned that giving more discretion to a judge could lead to the same end result that you're trying to avoid here with reforming Measure 11?
I think you need to remember, first of all, it is a reformation or reforming of the measure. It's amending it as compared to abolishing it. It basically puts us, as we do with all other felonies, puts us into a sentencing guideline. It's a guideline that basically says that the person coming before the court, it is presumed, it is the guideline that you will receive this length of sentence. We're taking Measure 11 and basically saying that those sentences that were passed by the voters back in 1994 would still be the sentence as the presumptive sentence at this point. And that basically you have the advocates come in and have aggravating or mitigating circumstances to be able to present to the court as to why it should go up or it should go down. And this is the process that you have to keep in mind, is that since statehood, and actually before statehood, Oregon has always trusted and has instilled in the judge, not the prosecutor, to set the sentence. I believe that this will give the same type of framework that we do with all other felonies, with the exception of Measure 11, of using the same formula and track.
I understand that. Just one follow-up. But so you're not concerned that giving a judge more discretion could still lead to disproportionate sentences, specifically for people of color?
The bottom line is that we need to allow the court to take in all factors and all considerations as to making their determination as to what is the most appropriate sentence on a case-by-case basis. And I would assume the court will take all factors, including race, demographics, whatever it may be, in consideration with maybe their life and other experiences.
Thank you.
So next we have Noel, and then she'll be followed by Dirk and then Dick Hughes.
Good morning, Senator. This bill is one of 4 that address Measure 11 reforms this session. At this point, is this the vehicle for Measure 11 changes? And if so, what are the implications for House Bill 2002, which is one that Shannon and her organization have supported?
Yeah, What I would say is I believe that 401 is a bill that will be seriously considered as the vehicle for potential changes to mandatory minimum sentencing in the state. And I would allow for Shannon to respond, but my understanding 2002 is still in play. They're looking, I think, at more of the other components to it, but I think it'd be best to allow Shannon to respond to that portion of the question.
And I can,
Unfortunately,
oh, go ahead, Amanda.
yeah, go ahead, Babak. Unfortunately, Senator had to, or Shannon had to pop off, so go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm part of the Transforming Justice Coalition that work collaboratively with stakeholders across the state to put together House Bill 2002. And one of the differences there is really the racial justice lens of looking at two crimes that drive racial disparities in Oregon through the Measure 11 sentencing, which is assault in the second degree and robbery in the second degree. Those two offenses make up 30% of convictions for Measure 11, which really drives those statistics that I shared about the racial disparities, especially of Black Oregonians. And so we're looking at reducing the sentence lengths from 70 months down to 30 months on those two specific charges.
I believe, Bobbin, did you have something to add to the previous question?
Oh, yeah, just addressing sort of sentence disparities across regions or even across demographics. I think one of the things to be sort of at the forefront of this conversation is most states did move to determinate sentencing in the 90s and are slowly rolling back those reforms. But our understanding of how to collect data, how to create transparency and reporting has also changed significantly. So, even though that we may return Oregon back to a guideline system or presumptive sentencing system, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So there's additional reforms and reporting like through the CJC that allows us to be able to understand the variations that we may be able to see. And I think one of the things that we see across every other sector of society, except the criminal justice system, is a constant iterative process that sort of adjusts to our modern understanding of the world. And I think what Senator Prozanski and other elected leaders are pointing out is Measure 11 is based on thinking, an antiquated way of thinking from the 1990s, and we just haven't caught up. Our criminal justice haven't caught up. I would assume, and it's sort of our mission and purpose and work that we try to do is, once we engage in these reforms and even pass them, is to constantly reevaluate and reassess how they're being implemented and their impacts. So I would strongly, I think that idea that, yes, we may see some unintended consequences or some variations in sentencing, or we may not. But I think the point is that there's commitments by community advocates, by legislative leadership and others to sort of constantly reevaluate this. And that's the habit I think we need to get into. And I think that's the thing that the Oregon District Attorneys Association seems to be so opposed to, is that constant reevaluation, that transparency, that looking under the hood, so to speak, of what it is, what's happening to people going through the system. So I just wanted to make that point or emphasize that point that, we will address those and pay attention to those. And there are better systems in place to acknowledge those disparities.
Dirk, why don't you go next?
Yeah, thanks. I have two questions. One is technical and one is political. It is really hard looking at the CJC grid to figure out exactly what Measure 11 means and then what this means. I don't know what the numbers, for instance, mean. But I did hear Kevin Barton say today that under his reading of it, which I am sure is not the most charitable, the presumptive sentences would also be maximal sentences, and that it would be very hard, if not impossible, to go above that. Is there a resource you all can point us to just, as people trying to explain this, show people what this actually means? Because it is kind of tough to parse, at least for me.
Yeah, so what I'd ask you to do, Dirk, is just look at the bill itself. I'm pulling it up right now to see if I can't just jump on it, but it makes it very clear in the bill. I actually had the opportunity to present this, what's now Senate Bill 401, to the Oregon District Attorneys Association. I believe it was January 8th of this year during their monthly meeting. And
well, I read the bill and it just references the CJC grid. And then I look at the CJC grid and that's not the easiest, as I say, not for me, the easiest thing to understand.
Yeah, so the grid stuff, that is not what you should be looking at. The text of the language makes it clear. And let me just get to that, please. All right, so if you look on the first page under section 1, sub B, this is starting on line 23, and it says, notwithstanding these such, the presumptive sentence is the corresponding term of imprisonment enlisted on each of those offenses. And then it's on line 25. The court may impose a greater or lesser sentence as permitted under the sentencing guidelines. So
Right.
that makes it very clear that they can do it. And what you need to consider is that when you look at sentencing guidelines, there is a sections for going up or below, and it's called departure of sentences. And they have mitigating as well as aggravating factors. And this is what they use on all other felonies and what they can actually use today to try to increase the length of the sentence above the minimum. Remember, this is a mandatory minimum, it's not a mandatory maximum. So Mr. Barton is just wrong by his interpretation. I brought this up to their group, and they basically, they took it in, but they didn't respond. It really comes back to the power control issues. And then the other part that I think is worth noting is that they actually made the statement to me at that meeting that some of the sitting district attorneys do not trust judges to do the right thing at sentencing. And so that really shows and demonstrates how far out of touch they really are as to what our judicial system is based on, of having a non-impartial, I should say, individual, this being the judge, to make those decisions and not the passionate advocate for or against an issue.
Well, what I'm saying, okay, I've read it and I understand it says you can go higher. What's not clear to me is that guideline that we're talking about that they need to use if they're going to go higher than the presumptive allows them much room to do that. I mean, it's just, this is technical and we don't have to get into it right now. It is something I'm trying to understand a little better.
So what I would suggest is let's put that question into the parking lot, and what we can do is get someone from either CJC, or we can potentially get another person that can maybe offline have a better, fuller explanation than what I've given you.
And then the political question, sorry. I've seen you advocate a lot of bills, Senator. I don't know that I've seen you hold a press conference for a bill. And this is one that needs two-thirds support to pass and has, as you note, opposition from the DAs, many of them. Is this, I mean, why are we seeing a press conference? Are you trying to, I don't know, show the public more about what you're trying to do? Is there a concern that this is being misrepresented, or concern that maybe there's not support from your colleagues to pass something like this?
We're in a pretty unique situation right now, and that is basically with the pandemic. On larger bills, it's not uncommon for us to have some type of press availability or press conference in the building, in the media area. And this is kind of an extension of that. I thought this was a way that we could actually get more information out to the general public as well, while you are doing your job and asking the questions that you're asking. I mean, the bottom line is what we're trying to do is demonstrate, and really where the Oregon District Attorneys Association as an association is trying to lead the discussion that, one, this is a repeal of Measure 11. It is not. It is a modification, just like we have done previously. We've modified it. And in some of the examples that we heard today, where they said, well, the person wouldn't be getting that length of sentence, the reason for that is because we made some changes previously that did in fact modify some of Measure 11. Ballot Measure 10 that was passed with Ballot Measure 11 gives us, the legislature, the authority that the people gave us at the time that they passed Measure 11, almost the exact same percentage of voters voted for Measure 10, that says that we, the legislature, should in fact take up these type of issues. And yes, there is a kind of quote safeguard that it takes more than just a simple majority. It does in fact currently take 2/3 vote. And we're working on basically acquiring those votes as we go through our public hearings.
Thank you.
I know Dirk is up next, and Bobbin maybe had something to add, but why don't we let Dirk ask his question as we're getting close to time, and then Bobbin, maybe you can follow up.
Okay.
Were you saying I could ask a question? I was a bit confused. This is Dick.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to talk so circularly.
Okay, that's okay. I'm easily confused. I'm a journalist. But Senator, thank you very much for doing this. And my question simply is a follow up on Dirk's. This is such a strange session, and we're still trying to figure out what the priorities are. And I know this is a high priority for you. Where does it fit within the priorities for the Senate Democrats and with everything else you have going on? It's another way of asking, I suppose, about the prospects for approval.
Yeah. So basically, I would say it's a measure that's important to many of us in the caucus as to ensuring that we have reformation and that we have reform and that we have justice. I mean, at this point, we don't have justice when you have an advocate basically setting the framework of before they start negotiations, as you've heard from Bobak, basically fear negotiations, fear dealing as to, hey, you know what? We've got 6 counts against you that are Measure 11. That means you're going up the river for many, 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 many years. Or you take this little sweet deal we're going to give you that says that you can't appeal, you can't participate in programs that will make you a better person when you do come out. And that basically those are the type of scenarios that are not what the voters intended. And that's why even under the ODA poll, plus the one that just came out last week, overwhelmingly that the voters do in fact want discretion at the court to make the appropriate decision on the sentence. Bobbin?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to go back to Dirk's question about the aggravating factors in sentencing. I think it's important to pull apart charging, conviction, and sentencing. If there are extenuating circumstances with the offense or with the action that the person is being charged with, DAs and prosecutors always have the ability to increase charges or increase the severity of charges, which would reflect in a different sort of presumptive sentence. So I think this narrow focus on the difficulty it requires for a judge to go up or down on a presumptive sentencing guideline is sort of reducing the conversation down sort of out of context. Like if it's a particularly, egregious crime, there are multiple charges that a prosecutor can bring. There are different, again, serious charges, and that would result in a higher sort of level on the sentencing grid. So I think focusing on whether or not you can move upwards or downwards, and it should be difficult. I think there should be compelling mitigating or aggravating circumstances that move people up and down the grid, but that, all those things can be changed on the front end. So I think that's really important to pull apart, that there are different steps in that process. So.
Yeah, and Dirk, if you look at this departure sentences, let me just give you a couple examples. Aggravating factors, which are under the ORRs that they refer to, deliberate cruelty, vulnerable victim, threat of actual violence. Those are just 3 of like 6 or 7. On the other side, victim was the aggressor or participant in the criminal conduct. Defendant acted under duress or compulsion. I mean, there are factors in clear that we actually have in place that each advocate can bring forward as to consideration by the judge.
I appreciate that. And I only ask because these are things being changed by the bills as opposed to status quo of the system. So I want to make sure, or amended if that's the correct terminology, but these are things that would be altered by this bill. So that's why I want to make sure. No?
The only thing that this bill will do will take those Measure 11 sentences that are in the bill, excluding murder and ag murder, basically in saying we're going to take those lengths of sentences and say that is the presumed sentence. This is what the person's going to get unless the court determines through a process as to whether it should be a longer sentence or a shorter sentence using the departure criteria.
And if I could just follow up on the sort of the political point, I just want to say I'm really grateful for Senator Prozanski and holding this space to have this conversation. ODA's report and sort of posturing of this conversation is, in my opinion, reckless. The reports that they're putting out are inaccurate, out of context, and are incredibly misleading. And I think it's important to have an open dialogue and constructive and substantive conversations about differences in policies when we can assume or sort of work around the same facts or same sort of understanding of information. But the way the Oregon District Attorneys Association have sort of entered this conversation is that they are not accepting the facts or the information as it exists. And I think what Senator Prozanski is doing, I think, well and helping us do is actually enter a conversation where we can agree to what what the facts and information are and base policy reforms around that. So I think it's incredibly important to be able to have this opportunity and for Senator Prozanski to be hosting something like this.
So Senator, do you have any final words that can help you get up to your next appointment?
Yeah, I guess I want to thank everyone for their time and diligence in looking at this. You know, the reality is what we're trying to do is bring justice back as the way it was meant to be. When you look at the poll of the Oregon District Attorneys Association and you look at the more recent polls that was released by the appeal, it definitely and clearly shows that voters in this state expect and want judges to make the decision around sentencing, that they should in fact have discretion with the guidelines of what the sentence should be to actually treat and utilize that system to best fashion a sentence for that individual. Remember, 93% of these individuals are coming out. How do we make certain that they are active and they're actually going to be a participant in the time that they're in custody to actually better themselves? And for me, this is the way that we ensure, because by putting incentives in, not only do we make it where they are modeled good behavior, getting incentives, it actually pays off in with the issues that we've heard from the director of the Department of Corrections, as well as a line officer, as to the safety and well-being of everyone in that system. And think about yourselves. If you do a good job, you get a raise, or you may get a promotion. Why shouldn't we be allowing for those individuals that are in custody that we want them to model the same behavior that we have on the outside by being incentivized to do better in their lives and make it a transition that when they do come out, they will be good neighbors, they will be individuals that will contribute to our society and not stay in the system that we are funding a continual, not only financially, but more importantly, recidivism. Cutting recidivism. And this is the one thing that I will leave you with. When you look at the Norway system that we went to and saw, there's across the country 20% recidivism rate, where ours is close to 40%. And the reason they gave us is that we try to keep everything normal while people are in, so we don't disrupt what their obligations as citizens are. And we also hold them accountable for their actions. But we're also are giving them the tools so when they come back out, and if they're our next door neighbor, they're actually going to be productive people that we are happy to have next to us, as compared to someone that has been pinned up and restricted for umpteen number of years. Thank you.
Thanks.